Should AMD investors be worried about Nvidia and all the amazing products the company released in the past few weeks? I know a lot of talk has been happening, especially since Nvidia announced more information about its CPU. Let's take a closer look in today's episode. So if we take a closer look at year-to-date returns, right now Nvidia seems to be a clear winner, up 164% year-to-date. AMD is no slacker, is up roughly 84% year to date, but we can see Nvidia is up nearly 2 times as much. Recently, Nvidia just kind of shared more information about their Grace CPU and also the Grace Hopper super chip, and they also even gave us announced a supercomputer that's being powered by a nice amount of Grace Hopper super chips. So remember, this Grace is Nvidia's first CPU for the data center market, and this is a market that AMD is in, and they kind of are playing second place at the moment. Even though they are dominating in technology, they're still second place in forms of market share behind Intel. So, I mean, there are a lot of things happening here with AMD and the AI front, and I want to take a closer look at all of them. So, luckily for us, AMD did give us a great presentation during their earnings where they kind of showcase a little bit about all their AI products. And I'm going to try to touch on each of them. First, we're going to start off obviously with the server CPUs. AMD right now has their 4th generation EPYC Genoa processor. Within this 4th generation processor, they have kind of subsystems or kind of individual products that they are releasing. Some are releasing within this quarter, some are releasing within later this year. So even though this 4th generation came out in fall of 2022, AMD is releasing new products within this generation in this coming year. So they are continuing to keep up to date. So I want to take a closer look at first how AMD sees the competition of CPU right now, and also what Nvidia says about the kind of CPU landscape. So actually, let's start off with Nvidia. So Nvidia, after they had a really important keynote a few months ago, the GTC keynote. I believe that was even a month ago. And one thing that they really talked about here was the Grace, and more of Grace as just to CPU. And during the Q&A session, one of the analysts was pretty much, hey, how do you guys see the Grace CPU in forms of single CPU deployment as a market opportunity for you? And Jensen Hung responded and said, hey, yes, look, we see the single CPU as a market opportunity for us. However, Grace is really targeted at a niche market. And let me just be clear about that. They do mention that, hey, the x86 remains a large part of the world, and they expect it to continue to be so. x86 is the predominant platform, and it doesn't make sense to move enterprise computing to ARM necessarily to Grace. To Grace, right? So they're pretty much saying a few things, right? First, they're saying that Grace is only meant for a niche market. That's number one. Number two is there are a lot of kind of huge players out there that are still working on x86 platform. If they want to move into an ARM-based platform, there has to be a lot of changes, especially in the software side. So at the moment, because this is a place that is dominant by x86, some big players are not going to shift out just because of a few improvements or some benefits that might come from Grace, because the overall cost of shift might not make sense for them. So right off the bat, we can see that even Nvidia themselves sees the CPU market as kind of a small market for them. They believe the acceleration market, which is their GPU, is their biggest player. There was a JP Morgan Global Technology event on May 23rd, and AMD was present, and some of the analysts from JP Morgan were, hey, how do you think about the ARM-based CPU market? Right now, the ARM-based CPU in the server side only makes up 4 to 5% of total server CPU, but you have a lot of startups coming that way. So AMD pretty much said that, hey, right now, one thing that we are doing, one of the big changes that one of the reasons many kind of cloud server providers like Amazon are shifting to an ARM-based process is because the total cost of ownership sometimes is a little bit cheaper, especially for certain workloads. So that's why AMD themselves are releasing numerous kind of variations of their Genoa platform, right? They have Bergamo, they have They have also Sienna, I believe, and all these are meant for specific workloads and are also meant to kind of drive that total cost of ownership concern down. During that Q&A session, they do mention that they have Genoa X, which is focused on technical workloads. They have Sienna, which is focused on the low-cost telecommunication market, and they have Bergamo, which they talk about, which is literally tailored for native cloud applications. They actually offer better efficiency and performance than some of the ARM merchant products supposed to come to the market this year. So we can see sometimes, obviously, we get this big hype of ARM being this big play, but even the x86 players are mentioning. ARM based like Nvidia is saying that, hey, this is a very niche market. We don't expect to grab too much market share from x86 at the moment. And even the x86 players are saying, hey, we see why people are transforming to ARM based. We're also kind of shifting. We're kind of making our solutions kind of meet those kind of reasons why certain players are shifting. Kind of fast forwarding a little bit, remember that also AMD did purchase Xilinx about a year ago, and Xilinx is really known to be working with ARM. A lot of their FPGAs and kind of system on chips are used on ARM based products. So in theory, if AMD ever sees the market is really heading to that space, I do believe they have a huge amount of engineers to be able to kind of make that shift as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if they don't have a secret team just working in the back end right now, just in case that comes to fruition. So when we take a closer look at the CPU side, I don't really think Nvidia at the moment is much of a competition, especially because x86 is such a predominant player and it's just going to continue to be a beast. I mean, if you have two giants, Nvidia and Intel, still focusing in x86, they are focusing in this space because they do expect continued growth here. Staying here with the server CPU, I don't think the AI market is really going to drive a growth here in server CPUs, but I think the overall total addressable space of kind of data centers and server solutions is going to increase in the long term. So I don't believe AI is going to be a big push for AMD and their Genoa processors. I also don't believe it's going to be a big weakness. Now let's take a closer look at the second market, and I do believe this is one that AMD could win, even though Nvidia is the king in this space. And that is the kind of high performance data center server GPUs. But before we take a closer look at the MI300, if you are enjoying the episode, make sure to hit the thumbs up, make sure to hit the subscribe button, as it definitely helps the channel out. I'm trying to get 30,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Also, if you want to learn more about the semiconductor market, I have a pretty unique membership where I do kind of weekly deep dives on certain aspects in the semiconductor space. Make sure to click join. And finally, I want to thank The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video, and check out fool.com/Jose for the 10 best stocks to buy now. With that link, you get a promotional offer for the subscription service. Now, let's continue with today's episode. AMD later this year is going to release the MI300 accelerator. And the reason that I believe that even though Nvidia is by far the king in this space, AMD can definitely grab some market share, because I believe there's going to be too much demand not meeting the supply that Nvidia is going to kind of be able to pull out. Right now, Nvidia, there are reports that they are rushing orders from TSMC, trying to meet the overall demand of this kind of AI rush. But I do believe Nvidia is going to have some slackers, maybe some smaller players, that AMD is going to be able to grab market share. And I don't believe it's going to be by much. There was a report by TrendForce earlier this year on March 2023, which mentioned that in terms of market share for server GPUs, Nvidia now controls about 80%, where AMD controls about 20%. I do believe the total addressable market for server GPUs is increasing. So even if kind of Nvidia grabs market share here, because the total addressable market is growing, I do believe AMD in forms of revenue can also grow. And I do believe this is one where AMD can definitely gain thanks to the overall AI craze. Like I mentioned, the MI300 is expected to come out in the second half of 2023. It's mainly focused on high performance computing and AI efficiency. And the company did mention during kind of that presentation that I talked about on May 3rd that right now they have said that engagement for the MI300 is roughly 3x compared to what it was at the beginning of the year, thanks to that AI inflection point. So again, even though AMD is not the top player here in this kind of GPU market, because there's such huge demand, I do believe AMD could win in this space. So I personally believe that this is a market where AMD can definitely grow some form of revenue. On the bad side of this, AMD's kind of GPU server side, it's not much revenue for them at the moment. They do make most of their revenue from the CPU server, but who knows? Maybe that can change. Maybe with this MI300, it might make some distinguishable money on their top line. The other thing that we are seeing though is AMD is really focusing on the software side. Obviously they have the hardware, but one thing that Intel and Nvidia kind of beat AMD in is in the software development of a lot of these processes and a lot of these workloads. So AMD during the recent earnings did mention that they have created an AI team which is really focused on software development. I think this is a great move for AMD, and this is something that might not showcase results in the short term, but in the long term I do believe it's going to make sure that AMD continues to be a winner in the semiconductor market. So now, kind of focusing, we talked about the CPU, we talked about the GPU. Now let's take a closer look at the consumer side. AMD is releasing the Ryzen 7040 for mobile processors, and this is going to have an AI accelerator. Again, this is for the consumer market. This kind of AI accelerator is going to allow certain workloads, certain AI workloads to be happening. For example, if you have this 740 series on your laptop, you can do things like automatic framing, you can do things like idle contact correction, you can do things like advanced background effects, and this would all be done in the back end thanks to their AI engine. It will not take too much workloads from their CPU. NVIDIA already does this with their GPUs. They have this product called NVIDIA Broadcast, which is an AI enhanced voice and video platform. I'm actually using it. Not once have I looked at the camera, but I am using the eye correction software from it, which kind of looks like I'm always constantly looking at the camera. So NVIDIA has done this with their consumer products already. AMD seems to be doing it with their CPU consumer products. I personally don't believe this is going to be any big win for any player. I think this is just going to be a normal for the semiconductor market where some form of AI accelerator is going to be expected in a chip. What I do like about this, though, is this kind of AI accelerator is going to be in other products. And this is where we're going to take a closer look at Avail. So Avail is an AI inference kind of optimized platform. We can see that the Avail MA350 is meant for high volume streaming. They kind of just talk about it, how it's really well with this kind of huge move we're seeing in high volume. This high volume we're seeing in interactive streaming and kind of real time stream and video products. Within this product, they do mention that it is powered by an AI processor that kind of helps as a co-processor to the encoder and kind of makes this even more optimized for kind of the decode scale and the encoding process that happens in a lot of these accelerators. So again, I do believe that even though that consumer AI processor might not be a big win, the kind of research and development that's being done there can go into other AMD products. I do believe the Avail is not going to be a huge player for them. This is thanks to their Xilinx acquisition, but Xilinx has a lot of cool products, a lot of accelerators that will have a huge demand in the AI market. They also have the Pensando DPU, which they're with their Pensando acquisition. Let's take a closer look at the Pensando DPU. This is part of AMD's kind of networking products. And if we take a final look here, AMD also has kind of system on chip products and their FPGA product line. Again, this is all thanks to the Xilinx acquisition. Thanks to Xilinx, AMD also has kind of system on chips and FPGAs, and I do believe as we continue to see this development of AI, there are going to be a lot more use cases for a lot of kind of these adoptable system on chips, and we are going to see a strong growth in these products as well. Like I mentioned, because of Xilinx, AMD does have a great team that is familiar with the ARM architecture. And I do believe for that reason, if AMD ever needs to kind of go into the ARM-based server CPUs, they have a great team already to kind of start and lead that charge. So I do believe AI in general is going to be a huge boost for them. I think the biggest boost is going to come in their MI300 instincts, in their kind of accelerators, and in their kind of FPGAs as we continue to see certain workloads really enter in that market. I don't think the AI market is really going to see a growth in CPUs or kind of the consumer products, but I think overall these two that aren't affected by the AI space do have long-term tailwinds that can really help this company grow in revenue. So obviously I'm bullish in Nvidia, I'm bullish in AMD. AMD, in my opinion, does have a lot of kind of catching up to do, especially in the software side. But in the past few years, we have seen that AMD's management has done really well at executing, and I don't think that's going to change. So I hope you guys enjoy the episode. Take care, have a good day, and see you next time.